Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Arcade Fire called Everything Now. Okay, so in the modern internet age, especially on YouTube, it's not especially a good look for critics to appear smug or condescending towards the audience. I mean, I rely on you guys. I would be lying if I didn't say I was grateful every single day for the growth of this community. Be it through you guys who just watch everything to even just the 1 or 2 videos a week, those of you who actually support me on Patreon. You're helping enable something for me that's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this channel could go in the upcoming years. That being said, when I started seeing the reviews for Arcade Fire's newest album with sort of mixed critical reception the band has never really received, especially in terms of the lyrics and songwriting, there was a tremendous sense of vindication that rushed through me. I'm not gonna say I told you so, but I am gonna claim at least some credit for calling this, because I was really hard on Reflector back in 2013, partially for its sloppily realized song structures and its lack of balance between all its vocalists, but most of all for the undercooked themes surrounding an artist's relationship with fame and the smug, self-obsessed writing trying to explore and deconstruct it. And for a critic who was just starting out around that time, that's the sort of controversial opinion that can cripple an upstart channel. Even if I eventually wound up putting Joan of Arc on my list of my favorite songs of 2013, and I stand by that. That song rules. And while I'll admit to never exactly being a huge Arcade Fire fan, their first 3 albums, and especially The Suburbs, they do hold a special place for me in harnessing real wit and insight to temper that earnestness, most of which curdle in an off-putting way on Reflector that reflected a band that has more ambition than the control or self-awareness in order to execute it well. And while some of this critical backlash has been long in coming, for some critics thirsty for cred, the knives have been out for Arcade Fire's pompous pretentiousness for some time now. The reviews of Everything Now showed not just those critics getting an easy target, but also an audience who have been willing to excuse so much from this Grammy-winning band finally hitting their breaking point, in many places seemingly for lyrical patterns that, yes, they continued over from Reflector. So you can bet that I wanted to get in on this at least for some point, maybe even give it a little bit more of a chance than I had before, so how is everything now? Here's the thing. There's a part of me that kind of wants to respect this album, if only for its construction, even though I will be joining the tide of people who can't in good conscience call this good. Hell, I'd even give it points for having more restraint and tightness than Reflector did. There's no overloaded soundscapes or ambient pieces that go nowhere and try everybody's patience. This is certainly a much more accessible record. But you know what, I gotta hand it to Arcade Fire. It takes a bizarre sense of bravado to flagellate commercialism and the information age and the internet and social media and the overload cycle of consumption, all the while locking themselves into it with ruthless efficiency. It's just a shame that once Arcade Fire does this, and of course tries to comment on it, they don't take those extra steps to make this record say more than just a selectively self-aware, nihilistic cynicism that for Arcade Fire's earnestness might be an even worse fit than navel-gazing paranoia. In other words, yeah, this isn't better than Reflector. In fact, it's by a measurable margin quite worse. But of course, I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's start off with the instrumentation and production. If you're expecting Arcade Fire to reclaim the dramatic swell and bombast of previous albums after the retro disco and new wave callbacks of Reflector, well, you could make the argument that they tried to split the differences with the frequent interjection of more dramatic string sections and horns and pedal steel of all things. But at the end of the day, the title track is anchored in a melodic progression that would be better suited for your average ABBA song. And I mean that as a compliment. That makes that song actually quite tolerable. In fact, what gets a little bit alarming is how much Arcade Fire seems to want to cycle through song structures and styles while still maintaining a mostly cohesive sound at its core. From stabs at slick new wave grooves on Signs of Life and Good Goddamn to more electronic sounds with thicker, gurgling synths and borderline chiptune infusions on Put Your Money on Me or Peter Pan, which somehow joins the ranks of songs with that title in recent years, which completely miss any sort of soaring power or the subtext of the Peter Pan story. And yet it doesn't stop there, because then we get the broad carnival-esque squonk of the horns on Chemistry, or the 2 versions of Infinite Content, one which sounds like Arcade Fire trying acoustic-leaning country, and the other with the faster riffs and distortion sounds like a stab at what might be kind of like punk, except with strings embellishments and awful guitar compression, because I'm fairly certain that Arcade Fire, Marcus Dravs, and Thomas Bangalter from Daft Punk don't have much of a clue how to pull off a punk sound on this album. That's one element that actually is quite alarming about this record as a whole. How sanitized and processed and lacking in color this album can feel, especially in its main guitar tones when we get them. And yes, I know it's completely intentional for some of the satire here, and yes, we will get to it, but it strikes me as a little bit rich on We Don't Deserve Love for Win Butler to dump on the radio when this is easily their most commercial album to date in indie rock. From the watery new wave textures that have no real verve or bite or funk to them, to the synthetic drum machines that they try to sneak in, to the bass overloaded mixes on Peter Pan and Chemistry, which along with Electric Blue and its squawking horns and incredibly annoying hook are easily some of the worst songs that Arcade Fire have ever made in their careers. Now granted, a big part of the problem here comes in the vocals. And you know what? On some level, I get what Win Butler and Régine Chassonnier is at least trying to do here. Of course, in the latter case, she's playing the glorified girl group inspired backing vocals, which for some reason on songs like Creature Comfort feel increasingly shrill, not exactly all that flattering to her. But then she actually is given the lead on Electric Blue, and it turns out really, really badly. Mostly because her voice and the synth they clash pretty badly there too. And yet what I found even more obnoxious is the character that she seems to play in the narrative of these songs. The fame-hungry, increasingly despondent party girl who unfortunately becomes a victim of all the projection that Win Butler is dumping on her as the male figure. And considering that's his wife, you'd think that he'd at least write something that doesn't come across as needy and desperate for her, but it's not like he fares all that much better. The vocal melodies are nowhere close to bringing any sort of dramatic swell that used to be Arcade Fire's hallmark there, and what's worse is that Win Butler is delivering his lines with a flat disaffection, heightening the cynical nihilism in the worst way possible. Now, there is a way to make this sort of attitude work, but you need the sort of wit or delivery that shows that you're in on the joke, or at the very least some real intensity, and sure, while Putting Your Money on Me kinda gets close, it's nowhere near enough to redeem the vocals here. Now, granted, if we're looking for a broader statement to sum up everything now, potentially workable ideas that get close and might kind of work conceptually but then blow the landing might be pretty apt. And let me start by saying again that there is some ideas at the core of this album that actually had some potential. I like the circular, self-contained headspace of the album, where the process of staying in that black perpetuates the consumerism that will then feed the band, and calling out the yawning existential crisis in this culture to fill voids that used to be filled by humanity. Look, that has some weight to it. I'll give them that. And you know what? I'll give Arcade Fire some more points for acknowledging that yes, they are part of the system. They might have contempt for that system, but they have to engage with it. But the problems, they start very early, with the first being that, once again, Arcade Fire is a lot more interested in their own story than making any sort of broader societal points. Songs like Signs of Life and Infinite Content and parts of We Don't Deserve Love, they're certainly there to point and scoff at that culture, but it's not like they really add up to much of a coherent statement, and considering how ham-fisted and borderline cliche some of the language is, there really isn't an excuse why that broader statement isn't there. They certainly have the earnest power for it. Why don't they do it? Now, you could make the argument that the story behind Creature Comfort could be fueling some of this. A constant stream of internalized self-loathing for guys and girls that culminates in the line, "God, make me famous. If you can't, at least make it painless." A mantra that plays as a girl tries to commit suicide while listening to Arcade Fire's first album, with Win Butler seemingly concerned that his art could have assisted in this step, especially in a world where this girl likely couldn't see all the privilege and possibilities around her. She didn't have to do this. And yet the line that drew a lot more of my attention was this: "I'm a liar, don't doubt my sincerity." Let me make this abundantly clear. This is arguably the worst thing Win Butler could have said or written on this album, yet somewhat fitting thematically, but utterly gunning any sort of emotional investment from me. Because if we want to get kind of deconstructionist here, like the album is trying to do, on some level, representational art is never a complete portrait of the human experience. Never quite true. And yet, to quote Lydia Lovelace here, it still has the emotional power to make you feel something, to make it seem real. That earnest power, that was always Arcade Fire's biggest weapon. So why in the nine hells would you not only discard it, but seek to constantly undermine it on this project? The most obvious example comes across when they revisit revisit the exact same scene again on Good Goddamn, seemingly all the more jaded as Win Butler is now prodding her forward towards suicide, as the hook would now serve to highlight how a good God would disapprove of this, only for 2 songs later for him to disregard those messianic figures that always seem to let you down because maybe we don't deserve love. It's a bluntly nihilistic statement that, again, might have a kernel of truth in that no one person is entitled to affection from another, but when placed in the context of the album, it gets even uglier, and it completely removes any dramatic weight behind replaying that suicide on Good Goddamn. And the ugly context comes from this album's relationship dynamics. I've already said that I don't like how Win Butler writes for women on his album, but if possible, he's even worse from his own perspective on songs like Peter Pan, as he tries to get this girl to live free and fly with him now, as if he completely missed the point of Peter Pan's story. Or How on Chemistry, where despite this girl dancing with her boyfriend all night, not even showing the same interest in him, and him not even meeting her, he's got the possessive insistence that there's something there, they've got chemistry. That was a punchline on a Weird Al album, but since Arcade Fire don't show the slightest sense of humor, I get the uneasy feeling that it's supposed to be played straight with zero self-awareness. And then he's got the nerve to demand all sorts of trust from that partner on Put Your Money on Me, with such fun lines as, if you think I'm losing you, you must be crazy. But think about the bigger picture here. It's a song asking for our faith in him, even despite him saying that he's a liar, and a song later outright rejecting the sort of messianic martyr complex that he has always brought forward, even as the band's presentation will then reinforce that too. In other words, this is an album that at its core would think playing Russian roulette to your own music isn't just philosophically necessary, but romantic and meaningful and poignant, with the only respite being human connection that is so nauseatingly self-centered and one-sided that it misses any chance to ask the question of why. In Arcade Fire's closed circle of nihilism, there's no need for a why and any sort of motivation in society here, or even an acknowledgement of other perspectives in that society that looks down on radio songs and those kids hunting out for love on the dance floor every single night, even despite the fact that Arcade Fire have made their most shamelessly commercial, anodyne, and sterile project to date. In other words, damn near the dictionary definition of pretentious. By a fair margin, this is Arcade Fire's worst album, netting a 4 out of 10 from me and no recommendation. But again, I've seen the signs of this since Reflector. Everything now certainly is not surprising me with this, but I will say that for the Canadian band that made albums like Funeral and Neon Bible, and especially The Suburbs, to fall this far, a band that's always had a lot of real artistic potential for me, yeah, there's no way this isn't a disappointment. That band, they might look down on infinite content out in the world, with the masses finding infinite contentment, but never finding real passion beneath it. Yeah, I gotta say it, a lot of the content has a lot more passion than this. In other words, skip it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know I went long with this review, but like with the last Arcade Fire record, I need to make sure my points were pretty cleanly articulated. There was a lot to say about why this did not work. Beyond that, if you guys want to buy the album, if something that I said made you curious, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there, so again, you can all tell me how wrong I am. If you guys want to get more involved in my scheduling process, though, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add records or even movies to that schedule. More details right there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.